Living Spark and Living Mosaic. They are companion shows, projects of the Spark of Humanity Network. My name is Martha Holden. I am a member of the Spark of Humanity Network. Today we are transitioning from 2024 to 2025, when the Living Mosaic shows will, as such, will no longer, they're available on YouTube, they will no longer be live cast. And we're welcoming Danielle O'Hallisey, who will be hosting Living Spark. This all started with the insight that, in the language some of us use, there is a spark of humanity in each one of us. And that as we claim our sparks, which we do by becoming aware of our sparks, recognizing them, and connecting with and affirming the spark in someone else, that strengthens their spark, and it strengthens our spark. It seems that the strengthened spark acts to, as we say, erode the defenses, clarify the bafflement, and release the distortions. It's very good from the inside. You can be getting in touch with your spark and through it reaching out to and connecting and affirming the spark in someone else, and they don't know it. But it's subtly eroding their defenses, releasing their bafflement, clarifying their distortions. The insight that there is this spark of humanity in everyone, and that through it we become agents of transformation, has been around. We've been talking about it and working with it for several years. And then some of us got the insight that there is a solution to the causes of the horror, heartbreak, agony, distress that we experience and see on this planet and around us. And that we, each one of us, are a unique and essential part of the solution. We envisioned it as a living mosaic, hence the show Living Mosaic. That's the metaphor we used. It could also be a living dance. We also talk about being members or participating in or being creatures of an ever-evolving, multidimensional dance. Or it could be a body. We're all members of the same body, of the cosmos. All creation is one body. Any metaphor that works. Danielle, in her sensitivity and bright mind, pointed out that doing the spark practice of claiming our spark and connecting with others is a way that we can be moved into, we can become, it can form us into being who we are needed to be as part of the solution. It will move us toward our role within this living, ever-evolving dance, or our place within the mosaic, this infinitely deep place within the mosaic. So she kindly offered to pick up the ball and host Living Spark for this coming year. I think that's an accurate way to put it. I don't know, because I said, I'm Martha Holden. I'm a member of the Spark of Humanity Network. And Danielle is also a member of the Spark of Humanity Network. So this is the time when we're sort of passing the baton, inviting Danielle to take it over. And so for that, I'd like to say, Danielle, welcome. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And would you tell us a little bit about yourself and what drew you to this project?
Yeah, I found it kind of surprisingly about a year ago. This is January 2nd, 2025, for anyone who might stumble on this later on YouTube or something. Just around this time of the year, last year, New Year's, I said to myself, I'm going to reconnect with old friends, and Martha was one of them that I said, I haven't spoken to her in years, I'm just going to reconnect with her. And a couple days later, I got an email from Martha, because I had done nothing, as is often the case. I have my good intentions, but I don't get around to doing anything with them. And I had done nothing to reach out, and here was this email inviting me and presumably a number of other people to join the Living Mosaic. And I, I jumped right in, and it spoke to me. It speaks to me in an ongoing way. Um, I find and found, first of all, tremendous resistance on my part. Like, no matter what I've engaged in terms of spiritual practice, this just seemed a little. It was new. It was different, and I had to kind of reorient myself. So I began looking for a practical on ramp. Like, how do I do this? And like the Spark practice that we've done has been the twice a month phone conference calls where Martha leads us through a meditation. We've also had the every other week Living Mosaic, in which there have been discussions of various important things that I see as pointing back to our humanity. Whether the language Spark or Mosaic is working for me in the moment, sometimes it's perfect, other times it's just not quite there for me. Coming back to where is my humanity and how can I find it, how can I strengthen it in myself and in other people. So for me, living Spark became this thing that I every day was kind of niggling away at me, like, oh, what do I do? How do I actually use this? And will it work? Seems a little bit out there that somehow by looking at someone else's humanity, I'm strengthening their humanity. I can see it strengthening mine. I can see that I'm going to reframe my own thought processes. But to think of it as I'm gonna somehow, without preaching at them, without lecturing them, without stating, hey, I've got humanity and so do you, let's get down to brass tacks and deal with life on a different level. Without doing any of that, it seems impossible to my rational mind that somehow in an interaction with someone else that there can be a strengthening of it, or it seemed that way. I've shared with you, Martha, that when I first started looking, I live in a retirement community. There's crotchety old people, including me, all around me. So there are conflicts that are never threatening. There's never the fear of actual physical harm or violence, and there's nothing like that. But there's a lot of opportunities to look at and practice a kind of different way of dealing with conflict, and also with friendliness, and sometimes friendliness from people whose political signs in their front yard didn't match the ones in my front yard, and so there was this automatic defendedness. I think there have been a number of times that I've shared with you, but I think that one of the first times it was just someone who had been really just like a near neighbor. And in Southern California, the window would be open, my window would be open, theirs would be open, and I would hear them, this woman just shrieking at her daughter, who came dutifully every day to visit with her, and to make sure mom was okay, had the things she needed, all of that. But just I'd hear my neighbor just yelling sometimes, not every day, but frequently, and I'd see that she rarely came out of her home. And my interactions with her were brief, pleasant enough, but kind of difficult. And a piece of mail was delivered erroneously to me that needed to go to her, and I walked around the corner to her place, was trying to sit it down on her table out on her patio and just run away, because I didn't want to deal with this lady, and she came shrieking out, what are you doing? What are you putting there? What's up with, and I turned and explained what I was doing there and was really interested in getting away. And that suddenly I thought, oh yeah, this is a chance. Like this lady can barely get around. She's in her 90s. I have picked up that much in the past. Maybe this is an opportunity. Maybe this is how I test this. Not sitting in I do meditate, I do all that, and I try to visualize this spark of humanity thing every once in a while while I'm meditating, but in the real world, like, here's conflict. There's no harm done in my taking a beat, and kind of we have the older concept of counting to 10 before we engage in any kind of conflict. And instead of thinking about that, I wasn't counting to 10. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't trying to calm this lady down. I just thought, this is a human being. She can barely see, and she's frightened. There's a stranger on her porch, and I'm defending myself because this lady is shrieking at me. And within a minute, we were talking on a very calm, level basis, hearing each other. There was an interaction that was pleasant for both of us. That had started for no big reason. Had started out as full of conflict, full of angst, however we say that. And it was my first introduction to the idea that there's something there, and there's something that I can deliberately tune into when the need arises. So yes, that's my first living spark story. There have been a few others, but let's talk about that a little bit, Martha.
Okay, well, do you want to tell us any more about yourself?
Sure. I'm the one that chose the topic for today, being transition. I am a fully transitioned trans woman, and have in the course of my life have dealt with a lot of conflict over that. And I do have kind of a handful of go-to things that I've noticed over the years. The first is that no one deals maturely with a novel situation. It is the human condition that when something is presented to us, that as adults we've dealt with a lot of stuff, and yet when something wholly new is presented to us, it's pretty difficult for any of us to respond maturely to that change. So, yeah, that's been a big one. We're talking today about transition on the broadcast level, switching from Martha and Living Mosaic to, for the year of 2025, Danielle and Living Spark. But there's an underlying thread for me. I'm not going to come at people and say, "Hey, this is my topic this week. It's about being trans and this." It's not that isn't my. That isn't. I try to make sure that that's not the most interesting thing about me. And in this situation, I'm going to try to make sure that what I'm talking about pertains to the lives of many people. That anybody can access the topics that we're discussing. But yeah, in terms of how of my life and how today's discussion relates, that is very much my on-ramp to the topic of transition, is that which we in our culture have now come to recognize is not super common, but that it exists. The trans version of transition, but also that everybody is constantly living with the changes inside themselves and the changes outside themselves. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It reminds me of something that we talked about, or I talked about on the Ever Living Mosaic show, the concept of everlasting. And I like to play with language. And the last is the wooden or metal form over which the cobbler stretches the leather to make it into footwear, make it useful. And so, but if we turn lasting into a verb, or whatever particle of speech it is, but that we are being everlasted, that we are ever being stretched and formed in order to be more useful, in order to reach our highest purpose, our highest usefulness. And that, So that means it's, whether we're aware of it or not, we're always in transition. So it's handy for me, for instance, to realize that, okay, I'm cisgender here, mature, past all that stuff, but there are ways in which I am still being stretched and formed, and to know that that's just part of the process, and accept that that's just part of the process. Aging is a really good one for many. It's sort of gradual shift of abilities, shift of interests, shift of capacities. And for some of us, it happens quite suddenly. There are events that happen that, oh yeah, I've never gotten back from that, that stroke, that brain injury, that fall, that pneumonia, whatever. But to realize that we're ever being, if we approach it with the attitude that this can be, if we allow it to be, if we don't get stuck in our stories about, oh, poor me, right? We can live into it to become even more productive, useful, creative, have deeper joy in our life. So, do you think, this is getting a little personal, Danielle, but this major transition that you've undergone, have you found that has released any capacity in you? Do you feel like I think that by taking over doing Living Spark, you are a powerful witness to people in transition who have family members who are in transition who are considering it. I think that's a very powerful implicit witness. But beyond that, have you been aware of any shift in your capacities or opening of creativity or anything?
Are we specifically talking about the year I've spent with Living Mosaic, or are we talking more broadly?
No, we're talking more back into the moment when you said, I've had it with this male body, I'm moving into who I really am.
Yeah. I would love to tell you that after that, I embraced change. I've always loved that idea. And by the way, I love the idea. I must have missed that episode, because the idea of lasting, which we think of as unchanging, and instead it being a process of change. I do love that. But I'd love to say, I learned how to change. I learned how to embrace change. I'm good with change. I look for change. None of that is true. I'm perfectly human and perfectly flawed and scared of change, just like everyone else. But I do have a muscle that's kind of been trained now, that is very that I can eventually come back to. I'm reminded of Winston Churchill once said, "You can always count on the Yanks, the Americans, to do the right thing after all else has failed." And that's in that regard, I fit that description perfectly. But I have learned there's a lot of social currency in self-pity. People respond well to it. People have their own stories that evoke, compassion, pity from all of us. And I have spent a lot of my energy in that space. It wasn't until I had since the pandemic, since 2020, I've had 6 heart attacks, open heart surgery, have a pacemaker implanted, and have lost the ability. You were talking about sometimes change comes precipitously, and I've lost the ability to work because it was too stressful. On and on and on. There have been a number of changes that I have resisted bitterly, and yet there's something in me that knows that change is not only inevitable, but it's happening right this second. It's happening because every molecule in our body is vibrating, moving, changing. Every cell in our body is aging. The brain patterns are being put down no matter how old and familiar we are with our life. There are new paths coming in. And so, yes and no. I mean, yes, I am capable of grasping change, and I'm capable, as you just pointed out, like when you talked about doing this, it was a little scary, but it was like, I know I have to do that. I know this is my next step in my journey, or one of many next steps. So all over the place with that answer, but it's kind of how I am with change. I'm all over the place with it.
Yeah, it's good to let people know that. I see we have about 4.5 more minutes on this particular episode. So anything more you'd like to say or any thoughts that come up?
Yes, I hope to have one of the things I want to say is that I hope to have people tuning in a way. The Zoom thing, I'd be able to converse with people who check in via Zoom, and that would be really nice to have some, or email, to have that coming in. When we send out our newsletter, you have all the links to that kind of thing. So anyone that's watching this most likely has access to that. I also want to point out that as I've been thinking about this, there's a format that I'm really kind of gravitating toward where I'm going to give myself homework at the end of every session. I'm going to give myself homework that I will invite people, other people, to at least think about or perhaps embrace, try to put it into practice. And then I'm going to open each session with a brief discussion of how my homework went for me, and whether or not I was able to bring it into my life, or if it was possible or not. Then I want to bring up whatever the next subject is going to be that leads to my homework at the end of that. That said, I'm going to say that my own homework for the next couple of weeks, I've had these moments of saying to myself when in a mild state of conflict or a mild state of confusion, I've had these moments where I've said, take a beat, think about an almost spiritual connection with this other person, and come back. What I'm going to ask myself to be doing over the next couple of weeks is to every day look for a place, sometimes with a pleasant person. This morning I had a conversation with someone I don't know, and I realized when I walked away from it, I felt elevated, but I had never let down my guard in a way that let me think about her spark and mine in communion. So, in other words, every day I'm going to try to take a little bit of a step deeper into the imagery of my spark and their spark with somebody. And I'm going to try to do that every day. Yeah.
Great. And if at one point you said in private conversation, spark does not necessarily work with you, but a place, whatever. I do want to let people know that the email will remain the same, that it'll still be livingmosaic2024@gmail.com. We're not changing that. So if you want to get in touch with Danielle and ask her questions, comment on the shows, that's still the way to get hold of us. livingmosaic2024@gmail.com, and I'm sure that the good people at Orca will banner that across this before it gets out into the world. Oh, there's more time. There's always more time than I think. There's a minute and 11 seconds. That's a lot.
Yes, there is.
So, okay.
Yes. I also want to point out that obviously we're in transition here. I have, this is my music studio. It conveniently has curtains behind it and a big mural behind it because I thought when I moved here, hey, I might want to do something on YouTube. So I set this up to function, and so I've been very grateful over the last couple of days that all this needed was a little cleaning and rethinking to make sure it was going to work. But there's something I didn't know I was preparing for this, and it's really helpful that we're able to have some degree of preparation already taken care of.
Yeah, well, it looks good. Looks good. You've got a lit barn and a Vermont landscape behind you, so that's not bad for Seal Beach, California.
Great.
Okay, thank you again, Danielle. Thank you to the folks at Orca Media. And from now on, if I show up on the screen for 2025, it's going to be Danielle that's the lead dog. Thank you very, very much. Take care.